The stage lights gleamed across the sleek glass table of the view, illuminating 5 faces, some smiling, some already uneasy. The audience clapped enthusiastically as Ben Stiller walked onto the set, his trademark grin radiating that familiar mix of charm and humility. For decades, he had been one of Hollywood's most reliable comedic presences, a man who could make people laugh simply by raising an eyebrow or delivering a single awkward line. But what none of them expected was that this seemingly harmless interview would turn into one of the most uncomfortable live television moments in recent memory. Ben took his seat, adjusted his jacket, and offered a friendly nod to the panel. "It's great to be here," he said, his tone light and gracious. "Always good to see you guys." Whoopi Goldberg smiled warmly. "We're happy to have you. Ben, you've got a new project out. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, congratulations on the success of your last one." The audience clapped again. Everything seemed pleasant, typical, routine, until Joy Behar leaned forward with a thin, almost predatory smile. "So, Ben," she began, her voice deceptively calm, "I have to ask something that's been on my mind for a long time." Her tone had an edge to it, something sharp that instantly changed the temperature in the room. The laughter and chatter from moments earlier evaporated. The other hosts glanced at each other, sensing the shift. "You've built this entire career," Joy continued, tilting her head, "on playing anxious, neurotic characters. But I'm wondering..." She paused just long enough for the silence to feel heavy. "Is that really acting or just you being yourself on camera?" The audience's polite smiles froze. A few people gasped softly. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. Sunny Hostin shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Ben's smile wavered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly, giving a soft laugh. "Well, Joy," he replied with measured grace, "I think most actors draw from personal experiences to some degree. That's part of the process. But I'd like to think there's a little more range to what I do than just neurosis." Joy smirked, unconvinced. She shuffled through her note cards, deliberately slow, letting the suspense hang. "See, that's interesting," she said finally, "because I've watched your work for decades, and honestly..." She gave a little shrug. "I don't see the range. Night at the museum? Same character. Meet the Parents? Same character. Even when you're directing, you cast yourself as the same anxious, whiny man-child. Don't you think audiences deserve better?" There was a stunned pause. A few uneasy chuckles from the audience faded almost immediately. The tension was suffocating. Whoopi tried to lighten the mood with a quick joke. "Well, hey, maybe he's just really good at being anxious." But Joy waved her hand dismissively, cutting her off. "No, I'm serious," Joy pressed. "I think it's a fair question. When you've been in Hollywood as long as Ben has, maybe it's time to grow out of the same tired persona." Ben inhaled slowly, his composure visibly tested. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. "You know, Joy, I think it's interesting that when comedians explore their range, people accuse them of losing their touch. But when they stay consistent, people accuse them of playing it safe. It's a bit of a no-win situation, don't you think?" Joy didn't blink. "I just think artists should evolve," she said flatly. "And it feels like you've been stuck playing the same guy since the 90s. Ben's jaw tightened. "I appreciate your honesty," he said coolly, "but I think that's a narrow take on what evolution means. I've written, directed, produced, and acted across genre, comedy, drama, even war satire. Maybe the characters share some traits, but that's part of my voice as a storyteller. It doesn't mean I'm not growing." The audience applauded lightly as if trying to break the tension, but Joy wasn't done. "Come on, Ben," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Tropic Thunder was 15 years ago. Since then, it's been a lot of safe stuff. Sequels, reboots, studio comedies. Do you ever look at your career and think maybe you played it too safe because you didn't want to fail?" Whoopi interjected again, firmer this time. "Joy, maybe let's pivot to the film he's here to talk about." "No, Whoopi," Joy said, cutting her off sharply. "I think people want to hear the truth. We keep celebrating mediocrity in Hollywood, and someone has to say it." The studio went dead silent. Ben sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then he spoke, quietly but with unmistakable force. "You know, Joy," he began, "it's easy to sit behind a desk and pick apart people who actually put themselves out there. But every film, even the ones that don't work perfectly, represents hundreds of people doing their best to create something meaningful. I've never done a project just for a paycheck. I've done them because I believed in something, even if that belief didn't always connect with everyone. Joy leaned back, her smirk returning. Oh, please, that's a nice speech, but let's be real, and you've done flops. A lot of them. Ben nodded slowly. Sure, he said. And every one of those flops taught me something. Failure's part of being an artist. You take risks, you grow, you learn. That's the difference between trying and just talking. That line hit the table like a hammer. The audience murmured. Joy's face flushed slightly, but she doubled down. So you're saying critics shouldn't call out mediocrity? I'm saying, Ben replied firmly, there's a difference between criticism and cruelty. You don't ask questions to understand, and you ask them to humiliate. That's not journalism, Joy. That's performance. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Sonny Hostin nodded slightly, trying to smooth things over. Okay, let's take a breath. But Ben wasn't done. His voice sharpened. I came here to have a conversation about storytelling, about my work, about the industry. Instead, I'm sitting here defending my entire career from someone who decided, before I even sat down, that I wasn't good enough for her approval. That's not conversation. That's a setup. Joy crossed her arms. If you can't handle a tough question, maybe you shouldn't do interviews. Ben stood up, his composure icy but controlled. There's a difference between tough questions and disrespect, Joy, and I think you just crossed it. Whoopi leaned forward urgently. Ben, come on, but he shook his head. No, Whoopi. I've been in this business long enough to recognize when something isn't worth engaging with. He looked straight at Joy. You've made a career out of mocking others for trying, but at least they're doing something. The crowd gasped. Joy's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ben gave a polite nod to the other hosts. Thank you, Whoopi. Thank you, Sonny. I wish you both the best. Then he turned and walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling as the audience buzzed with whispers. Joy tried to laugh it off. Well, I guess that's one way to end an interview. But her forced humor fell flat. Whoopi just sighed and rubbed her temples. By the time the show cut to commercial, the moment was already going viral online. Clips of Ben Stiller standing up to Joy Behar were spreading across social media like wildfire, with thousands of comments praising his composure and calling out Joy's hostility. In a single morning, a routine interview had turned into a public reckoning, not just for Joy Behar's interviewing style, but for the growing question of how far daytime television will go in the name of honest conversation. And as one viewer tweeted later that day, Ben Stiller didn't lose his cool. He reclaimed his dignity. The air inside the View studio felt electric, not with excitement but with something heavier, darker. What had begun as an awkward interview was now spiraling into a full-blown confrontation broadcast live to millions. You could feel the tension through the screen. Every person on set, Whoopi, Sonny, the crew, knew they were witnessing something that had gone far beyond television banter. Ben Stiller sat perfectly still, his calm demeanor concealing the storm behind his eyes. The audience was holding its breath, unsure whether to look away or lean in closer. Joy Behar, red-faced and defiant, stared him down like she was daring him to push back again. Ben's voice broke the silence, steady but cutting like a scalpel. Joy, he said, the only person here who can't handle being called out is you. I pointed out that you hadn't done your homework, and you've spent the last 10 minutes proving my point by admitting you haven't even seen the work you're criticizing. This isn't journalism. He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. It's performance art, not very good performance art at that. A wave of gasps rippled through the audience. Even the co-hosts looked stunned. Whoopi glanced at Sonny, silently mouthing, "Oh my God." The camera operator's hands trembled slightly as he zoomed in, unsure whether this was still an interview or an on-air meltdown. Joy's polite mask cracked completely. Her smile vanished, replaced by a glare that could have cut through glass. The air between them was thick with animosity. Then she did something no one expected. Joy Behar, veteran host, known for her sharp tongue but rarely for losing her composure, stood up from her chair. The audience reacted immediately, gasping and murmuring as she walked around the table, heels clicking sharply against the studio floor. She stopped just inches from Ben Stiller invading his personal space. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper, low enough to feel threatening yet loud enough for the microphones to pick up. You want to talk about performance art? She hissed. Your entire career is performance art. You pretend to be this sensitive, thoughtful filmmaker, but really, you're just another narcissistic actor who thinks the world owes him something. The audience collectively froze. Even the crew didn't move. For a long moment, time seemed to stop. Ben didn't flinch. He didn't rise to meet her or back away. He simply looked up at her, his voice quiet but edged with authority. "Joy," he warned, "you need to step back." Joy scoffed, eyes blazing. "Or what, Ben? What are you going to do? Have one of your neurotic breakdowns right here on live television?" She smirked cruelly. Maybe that would actually be interesting for once. The crowd reacted audibly this time. A collective gasp that echoed through the studio. Whoopi Goldberg stood halfway out of her seat, frantically gesturing to producers off stage to cut to commercial. But no cue came. Cameras were still rolling. Every second of this was live. Ben exhaled slowly, his voice calm but firm. "I'm going to do what I should have done 20 minutes ago," he said. "I'm going to leave. Because this isn't an interview anymore. This is you working through whatever personal issues you have with me or my success. And I'm not your therapist." That line hit like a thunderclap. The audience gasped again. Even Joy's co-hosts stared in disbelief. Joy let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Personal issues?" she echoed mockingly. "You think this is personal, Ben? Please. You're not important enough for me to have personal issues with. You're just a convenient example of everything that's wrong with Hollywood entitlement." Ben's eyes narrowed. His tone turned deadly quiet. "Then why?" he asked. "Have you spent the last half hour attacking me instead of asking a single question about the project I came here to discuss? Why did you admit you haven't even seen my work, yet still feel qualified to dismiss it? And why are you now standing in my personal space trying to intimidate me on your own show?" For the first time in the entire confrontation, Joy faltered. She blinked, caught off guard by the precision of his questions. The words she was so quick to deliver moments ago suddenly failed her. The audience sensed the shift. The balance of power was turning. Ben didn't stop. He leaned forward slightly, voice steady but carrying weight like a closing argument. "You want to know what I think, Joy?" he said. "I think you're threatened by people who actually create things. You sit behind this desk every day, commenting on other people's work, other people's lives, other people's success. But what have you actually built? What have you created that will outlast your next controversial opinion?" The studio went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Joy's face turned crimson. Her jaw tightened. She tried to compose herself, but her voice cracked slightly as she snapped back. "How dare you question what I've contributed to this industry? I've been fighting for progressive causes since before you were even famous. I've used this platform to speak out against injustice, to give a voice to the voiceless." Ben's response was measured, but it cut deeper than anything she could have expected. "And yet," he said softly, "you can't extend basic respect to the people you invite onto that platform. You say you give others a voice, but the second someone disagrees with you, you shout them down. That's not giving people a voice, Joy. That's making sure only yours is heard." A murmur of approval swept through the audience. Whoopi put a hand over her mouth. Sunny just stared down at her notes, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Joy, visibly shaking now, turned back toward the camera. "Well, if you're so offended, Ben," she snapped, "maybe you should just go. You clearly can't handle honest questions." Ben rose to his feet, calm and unshaken. "I have no problem with honest questions," he said, buttoning his jacket. "But what you're doing isn't honesty. It's hostility." He turned to Whoopi and Sunny and gave a respectful nod. "Thank you both for your time. I wish you the best." Then he looked at Joy one last time. "You know, Joy, sometimes the loudest person in the room is the one who's most afraid of being unheard." And with that, Ben Stiller walked off the stage. The audience erupted, some cheering, some in shock as the producers finally cut to commercial. Joy stood frozen for a moment, breathing hard, her face a mask of anger and disbelief. Backstage, crew members exchanged stunned looks. They had just witnessed television history, not the kind that gets replayed for laughs, but the kind that gets studied for years as an example of how quickly professionalism can collapse under ego and pride. By the time the commercial break ended, social media had already exploded. Clips of the confrontation were everywhere, trending on Twitter, dissected on Reddit, uploaded to TikTok. Comments flooded in by the thousands. Ben Stiller just schooled Joy Behar on live TV. Respect to Ben for keeping his cool. Joy crossed the line. That wasn't journalism. That was bullying. For once, the internet was united, Not in outrage, but in admiration for a man who refused to trade dignity for drama. And as one viewer perfectly put it in a viral post later that night, Ben Stiller didn't storm off the view. He walked away from nonsense. And that's something more people need to learn how to do. Ben didn't flinch when Joy jabbed her finger toward his chest. He didn't even lean back. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye, his voice steady, not raised, not shaken, but sharp enough to slice through the noise in the room like glass. "Joy," he said, "my problem isn't with strong women. My problem is with rude people who confuse cruelty with strength." The words landed like a slap. The audience gasped audibly. Even the camera operator hesitated, unsure whether to zoom in or cut away. Ben continued, his tone calm but icy. "You want to call yourself strong? Strength isn't about shouting the loudest or belittling others to feel important. Strength is grace under pressure. Strength is treating people with respect even when you disagree with them. What you're doing right now? That's not strength. That's insecurity dressed up as confidence." Joy's mouth fell open, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed genuinely stunned. Ben didn't stop. "You claim you're being honest," he said, "but honesty without empathy is just cruelty. You can't hide behind the word honest to justify being unkind. You invited me here to talk about my work, and instead, you've spent the last half hour trying to humiliate me, not because you care about journalism, but because you like the sound of your own voice." The audience erupted in a mix of murmurs and applause. Whoopi shot a glance toward the control booth, silently pleading for a commercial cut, but the producers were frozen. This was the kind of moment that would dominate headlines for weeks. Joy's face flushed a deep shade of red. "You are so full of yourself," she shot back. "You Hollywood types think you can walk into our show, play the victim, and then storm off when someone finally tells you the truth." Ben tilted his head slightly, almost pitying her. "Storm off?" he repeated. "Joy, I didn't storm off. I stood my ground while you lost control. I've been calm, respectful, and patient while you've been unprofessional, insulting, and frankly mean-spirited. And if this is your idea of telling the truth, then maybe it's time you start asking yourself why you need to tear people down just to feel powerful." The crowd broke into applause again, louder this time, sustained. Joy's eyes darted toward the audience, and for a flicker of a moment she looked rattled. "Save your applause," she barked at them, trying to regain control. "This is my show and I'll decide what's appropriate." Ben gave a small, knowing smile. "Exactly," he said softly. "That's the problem. You think it's your show, but it's supposed to be The View. You know, multiple perspectives, different opinions. Conversation, not confrontation. Somewhere along the line you forgot that." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Whoopi and Anna were speechless. Finally, Ben stood up from his chair. "I came here in good faith, Joy," he said, buttoning his jacket with calm precision. "I showed up prepared, ready to talk about my work, my team, my film, the thing I've spent years building. But instead I walked into a circus, and I refuse to be part of it any longer." Joy crossed her arms, trying to sound dismissive but failing to hide the tremor in her voice. "Go ahead, Ben, walk away. Run back to Hollywood where people tell you what you want to hear." Ben turned to face her one last time. His eyes were steady and his voice carried that quiet finality that made everyone in the room listen. "You know what's funny?" he said. "You think Hollywood is full of phonies, but at least we create something. Movies, stories, ideas that make people laugh or think or feel. You, Joy, you tear things down. You've made a career out of tearing down others, and you call it honesty." He took a step toward the edge of the stage. "But honesty without compassion isn't bravery. It's just cruelty with better lighting." The audience went wild and clapping, cheering, shouting. Joy tried to speak, but the noise drowned her out. Ben gave one small nod toward Whoopi and Anna. "Thank you for your time," he said sincerely. "I hope your viewers get the real story someday, not this circus act." Then he turned and walked off the set. The security guard stepped aside automatically, giving him a clear path. As the studio doors swung shut behind him, the room was left in a stunned, echoing silence. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then Whoopi finally muttered, half under her breath, "Well, that happened." The producers finally cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, social media was on fire. Clips of the exchange flooded Twitter and TikTok. Ben Stiller just destroyed Joy Behar live on The View. That wasn't an interview. That was a takedown. Joy picked a fight and got intellectually flattened. By the end of the day, Ben Stiller and Darth the View were trending worldwide. Talk shows, YouTube commentators, and entertainment news outlets all replayed the footage. Slow motion, frame by frame, analyzing every glare, every word, every moment. Some defended Joy, calling it tough journalism, but most agreed that Ben had handled the ambush with remarkable composure. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't stormed off. He'd simply dismantled his critic with logic, grace, and poise. And perhaps the most telling reaction came from the studio audience that had been there in person. As one attendee later posted online,